It happened so fast. One moment, I was walking through the kitchen, just reaching for my reading glasses on the counter, and the next, my feet were sliding out from under me like I'd stepped onto ice. The world tilted, my arms flailed helplessly as I crashed down onto the cold tile floor, my hips slamming against the hard surface with a sickening thud. Pain exploded through my body, sharp and unforgiving. I gasped, struggling to catch my breath, my hands trembling as I tried to push myself up. And then I heard it. Laughter. Not a gasp of shock, not a cry of concern, not the sound of someone rushing to help. Just laughter. High-pitched, mocking, unmistakable. I turned my head slowly, pain shooting through my neck, and there she was, Megan, my daughter-in-law, standing in the doorway with her hand pressed against her mouth, but her eyes were gleaming with something that made my blood run cold. Amusement. "Oh my God," she said between giggles, her voice dripping with a sweetness that felt like poison. "Are you okay, Mom?" The word mom felt like a slap. I stared at her, my body still sprawled across the floor, my dignity shattered into 1,000 pieces. She didn't move. She didn't reach out a hand. She just stood there, her lips twitching like she was trying not to laugh again. I slipped, I managed to say, my voice hoarse and shaking. "Yeah, I see that," she said, finally stepping forward, but slowly, like she had all the time in the world. "The floor was just mopped. Guess you didn't notice." Her tone was casual, too casual. She finally extended a hand, and I took it, humiliated, pulling myself out with what little strength I had left. My hip throbbed. My pride was in ruins, and all I could feel was the weight of her gaze on me, cold, calculating, satisfied. "You should be more careful," she said softly, brushing imaginary dust off my shoulder. "At your age, a fall like that could be really serious." At your age? Those words echoed in my mind long after she turned and walked away, humming softly to herself. I stood there in the middle of the kitchen, trembling, my heart pounding in my chest. Something was terribly wrong. This wasn't the first cruel thing Megan had done, but this felt different, darker. And then I remembered the camera. Daniel, my son, had installed a small security camera in the kitchen corner a few months ago. He said it was for safety, to keep an eye on things when he traveled for work. I'd barely thought about it since. But now, as I stood there, still trembling from the fall and the humiliation, my eyes drifted to that little black lens tucked quietly in the corner of the ceiling. It had seen everything. Every second, every laugh, every cruel, cold moment. For the first time that day, a small, quiet spark flickered inside me. Not anger. Not yet. Something much more patient. Justice. I didn't say a word. I simply walked slowly, painfully, toward the hallway, my hand pressed against the wall for support. Behind me, I could still hear Megan's soft humming from the living room, as if nothing had happened at all. But something had happened, and she had no idea that the truth had been recorded.
I reached my bedroom and closed the door gently behind me. My hands were still trembling as I sat down on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor. The pain in my hip was sharp, but it was nothing compared to the ache in my chest. How had it come to this? How had the woman who once called me Mom with warmth in her voice turned into someone who laughed when I fell? I closed my eyes and took a slow, shaky breath. But I didn't cry. Not yet. Because somewhere deep inside, beneath all the hurt and humiliation, I knew one thing for certain. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. And when the time came, when Daniel finally saw what I had seen, what the camera had captured, Megan's mask would crack wide open. I just had to wait. And I was very, very good at waiting. It wasn't always like this. There was a time, not so long ago, when this house felt warm, when laughter filled the rooms and Sunday dinners were something we all looked forward to, when I believed I was truly welcome here. I moved in with Daniel and Megan 2 years ago, just 6 months after my husband passed away. The grief was suffocating. The house we'd shared for 40 years suddenly felt too big, too empty, too full of ghosts. Daniel insisted I come stay with them. "Mom, you shouldn't be alone right now," he'd said, his voice gentle and full of love. "We have the extra room. Megan and I already talked about it. We want you here." And Megan had smiled, that bright, charming smile that made everyone believe she was an angel. "Of course, Mom," she'd said, wrapping her arm around my shoulders. "This is your home, too. We're family." I believed her. God help me, I believed her. The first few months were beautiful. Megan would make me tea in the mornings, ask about my day, sit with me on the porch and talk about everything and nothing. She'd call me Mom with such warmth that it filled the hollow space my husband had left behind. Daniel was so happy. He'd hug me every morning before work, telling me how glad I was that I was there, that we were all together. I felt safe, loved, like I belonged. But then, things started to change. It was subtle at first, little things. I'd leave my book on the coffee table and it would disappear, only to show up later in a drawer, tucked away like it had been in the way. I'd mention wanting to watch a certain show, and Megan would change the channel without a word, as if I hadn't spoken at all. Once, I made my favorite casserole for dinner, the one that Daniel used to beg me to make when he was a boy. I set the table, proud and hopeful, but when Megan walked in and saw it, her smile tightened. "Oh," she said, her voice light but sharp. "You cooked. I already ordered takeout." Daniel didn't notice the tension. He kissed her on the cheek, oblivious. "That's okay, Mom. We can have your casserole tomorrow." But we never did. The dish sat in the fridge for days until Megan quietly threw it away. I started to notice the way she looked at me when Daniel wasn't around. The warmth vanished. Her smiles became tight, forced, like a mask she only wore when he was watching. And then came the comments. Small, innocent sounding, but they cut. "Mom, you forgot to close the cabinet again. I almost hit my head. You left the light on all night. We're trying to save on bills, you know. Daniel's been so tired lately. I think all the extra activity around the house is wearing him out." Extra activity. She meant me. I started walking on eggshells, afraid to do anything wrong, afraid to take up too much space.
I'd retreat to my room more often, skipping dinners, avoiding the living room when I heard her voice. But the more invisible I tried to make myself, the more Megan seemed to notice me and resent me. One evening, I overheard her talking to a friend on the phone. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop. I was just walking past the hallway when her voice drifted through the cracked door. "I know, right?" she said, laughing softly. "It's like having a child in the house again, but, an old one. I can't say anything because Daniel worshipped her, but honestly, I'm counting down the days." I froze. My heart sank like a stone. I stood there in the hallway, my hand pressed against the wall, struggling to breathe. She wanted me gone. All the smiles, all the moms, all the little kindnesses, they were fake. A performance. A lie she told to keep Daniel happy. I didn't confront her. I didn't tell Daniel. What would I even say? That I felt unwanted? That his wife, who was so sweet to my face, was secretly cruel? He'd never believe me. So I said nothing. I went to my room, closed the door, and sat in the silence, staring at the walls of a house that no longer felt like home. And I wondered how much longer I could survive living like this. But I had nowhere else to go. No other family nearby, no friends who could take me in. This was my reality now. A guest in my own son's house. Tolerated. Not loved. Invisible, except when I made a mistake. And Megan? She smiled sweetly at breakfast the next morning, pouring me coffee like nothing had ever happened. "Sleep well, Mom?" she asked, her voice syrupy and false. I forced a smile. "Yes, thank you." But inside, I was breaking. The months that followed were slow torture. Megan's cruelty didn't come in loud, explosive bursts. It was quieter than that, more insidious, like poison dripping into water, slow, invisible, deadly. She had perfected the art of making me feel small. It started with the little things, the passive-aggressive comments, the eye rolls when Daniel wasn't looking, the way she'd sigh heavily whenever I entered a room as if my very presence was an inconvenience. But then it escalated. One afternoon, I was folding laundry in the living room, just trying to be helpful, when Megan walked in. She glanced at the neat piles of clothes, her expression unreadable. "You know," she said casually, picking up one of Daniel's shirts, "you folded this wrong. He likes his shirts folded a specific way." I blinked, confused. "I've been folding his shirts like this for 30 years, I said softly. She smiled, cold, sharp. "Well, things change. He's not a little boy anymore, Mom. He's my husband now." The emphasis on "my" was unmistakable. She took the shirt from my hands, refolded it, barely any different from how I'd done it, and set it down with an air of finality.
I didn't argue. I just nodded and quietly left the room, my chest tight with humiliation. But it didn't stop there. She started forgetting to tell me about dinner plans. I'd come downstairs expecting to eat with the family, only to find that they'd already eaten or ordered food for just the two of them. "Oh, sorry, Mom," Megan would say with mock innocence. "I thought you said you weren't hungry." I never said that. She turned the thermostat down at night, knowing I got cold easily. When I asked if we could turn it up just a little, she'd smile sweetly and say, "We're trying to be eco-friendly. Maybe you just need an extra blanket." She'd play music, loud, late into the night, right outside my bedroom door. And when I gently asked if she could lower the volume, she'd look genuinely surprised. "Oh, I didn't realize it was bothering you. I'll try to keep it down." But she never did. Every day I felt myself shrinking. I stopped asking for things, stopped voicing my needs, stopped trying to be part of the family. I became a ghost in that house. And the worst part? Daniel didn't see any of it. When he was home, Megan transformed. She was affectionate, attentive, warm. She'd sit next to me on the couch, pat my hand, ask how I was feeling. She'd laugh at my stories, bring me tea, call me Mom with that sickeningly sweet tone. And Daniel would smile, so happy, so grateful that his wife and his mother got along so well. "I'm so lucky," he'd say, kissing Megan's forehead. "You're amazing with her." She'd blush, playing the perfect daughter-in-law. "She's family," Megan would say softly. "I love her." I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab Daniel by the shoulders and tell him the truth, that his wife was a liar, that she tormented me when he wasn't looking, that I was miserable. But I couldn't, because I had no proof. It would be my word against hers, and I knew who he'd believe. So I stayed silent, and Megan grew bolder. One night, I woke up to the sound of voices, low, muffled, coming from the hallway outside my room. I sat up slowly, my heart pounding, and crept toward the door. I pressed my ear against the wood, straining to hear. It was Megan, on the phone with someone. She was saying, her voice dripping with irritation, "I swear to God, she's always here, always hovering. I can't have a single moment of peace in my own house." My stomach twisted. I know," she continued. "Daniel won't hear a word against her. He thinks she's some kind of saint. But you should see the way she looks at me, like I'm the villain. I'm just trying to live my life, you know?" She laughed, bitter, sharp. "Honestly, I don't know how much longer I can deal with this. She's old, she's slow, she's always in the way. If it were up to me, she'd be in a home by now." I stopped breathing. The words hit me like a physical blow. A home. She wanted me in a home. I backed away from the door, my hands shaking, my vision blurred with tears. I sank down onto the edge of my bed, my heart breaking into pieces. This wasn't just dislike.
This wasn't just frustration. This was hatred. And I was trapped. I lay awake the rest of that night, staring at the ceiling, wondering how my life had come to this. Wondering how the woman my son loved could be so cruel. But more than anything, I wondered how long I could survive in a place where I wasn't wanted, where I was nothing more than a burden, an inconvenience, an obstacle to someone else's happiness. The next morning, Megan smiled at me over breakfast, sweet as sugar. "Morning, Mom," she chirped. "Sleep well?" I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time, I didn't smile back. "Fine," I said quietly. Her smile faltered just for a second, but then it returned bright and false. "Good," she said, turning away. And in that moment, something inside me shifted. I was tired of being small, tired of being invisible, tired of letting her win. I didn't know how or when or what I'd do, but I knew one thing for certain. This couldn't go on forever. The fall changed everything. Not just because of the pain, though my hips still ached days later, a constant reminder of what had happened. And not just because of the humiliation, though that memory haunted me every time I walked through the kitchen. It was the laughter, that cold, cruel laughter that echoed in my mind long after the moment had passed. And it was the realization that Megan had finally crossed a line she could never uncross. I spent the days after the fall moving carefully, quietly. I didn't mention it to Daniel when he called from his work trip. I didn't complain. I didn't accuse. I just waited, and I watched. Megan seemed pleased with herself. She moved through the house with a spring in her step, humming softly, smiling to herself when she thought I wasn't looking. She'd won in her mind. She'd broken me. But she didn't know what I knew. She didn't know about the camera. It was a small thing, a sleek black lens tucked into the corner of the kitchen ceiling, barely noticeable unless you were looking for it. Daniel had installed it 6 months ago, part of a home security system he'd set up before one of his longer trips. "Just in case," he'd said. "I want to make sure you're both safe when I'm not here." At the time, I thought it was sweet, protective. Now, it felt like a gift from the universe. 3 days after the fall, when Megan went out for groceries, I made my move. My hands trembled as I opened the security app on the tablet Daniel had left behind. It took me a few minutes to figure out how to navigate it. I wasn't very tech savvy, but eventually I found the camera feed. And there it was, a log of recorded footage, organized by date and time. My heart pounded as I scrolled back to the day of the fall. I found the timestamp, 11:47 a.m. I hesitated, my finger hovering over the play button. Part of me didn't want to see it again, didn't want to relive that moment. But I had to know. I pressed play. The screen flickered to life, showing the kitchen from a wide angle. There was the counter, the sink, the doorway. And there I was, walking slowly across the kitchen, reaching for my glasses. My stomach tightened as I watched myself slip. It happened so fast. One moment I was standing, The next, I was crashing to the floor, my body twisting awkwardly, my face contorted in pain. I looked so fragile, so helpless. And then the camera captured something else. Megan. She appeared in the doorway, but not rushing in, not panicked. She was leaning against the frame, one hand on her hip, watching. And then she laughed. It was clear as day. The sound was muted on the recording, but I could see her face, her eyes crinkling with amusement, her mouth open, her shoulders shaking with laughter. My chest tightened. But then I noticed something else. I rewound the footage back to 15 minutes before the fall. And there she was, Megan, mopping the floor. That wasn't unusual in itself, but what happened next made my blood run cold. She finished mopping, wrung out the mop, and set it aside. And then she paused. She stood there for a moment, staring at the wet floor, her expression thoughtful. And then, deliberately, carefully, she walked to the doorway and peeked down the hall, checking to see where I was. She walked back to the wet floor, glanced at it one more time, and then left. She didn't put up a wet floor sign, didn't call out a warning, didn't do anything to make sure I'd be safe. She just left the floor slick and dangerous, knowing I'd be coming through any minute. I stared at the screen, my hand shaking. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't carelessness. She had planned it. I replayed the footage again and again, unable to look away. Each time the truth became clearer, sharper, more undeniable. She wanted me to fall. Maybe not to hurt me seriously, but to humiliate me, to remind me how weak I was, how much of a burden, to break me. I sat there for a long time, the tablet resting in my lap, my mind racing. I should have felt angry, furious, but instead, I felt something else. Clarity. For months, I doubted myself, wondered if I was imagining things, if I was being too sensitive, if I was the problem. But now I had proof. Undeniable, unshakable, recorded. Megan had shown her true face, and the camera caught every second of it. I carefully saved the footage, making sure it wouldn't be deleted. I didn't know exactly what I'd do with it yet, but I knew it was important. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about the truth. When Megan came home an hour later, humming cheerfully as she unpacked the groceries, I was sitting quietly in the living room, a book open in my lap. She glanced at me and smiled, sweet, innocent. "Need anything, Mom?" she asked. I looked up at her, my face calm, my voice steady. "No, thank you," I said softly. She nodded and disappeared into the kitchen. And I sat there, turning the pages of my book, my heart steady for the first time in months. Because now I had something she didn't. Power. Not loud, explosive power, not the kind that demanded immediate confrontation, but quiet power, patient power, the kind that waits for exactly the right moment. And that moment was coming. Daniel was due home in 3 days, and when he arrived, I would show him exactly who his wife really was.
Not with accusations, not with tears, not with desperate pleas for him to believe me, but with evidence. Cold, irrefutable evidence. The camera had seen everything, and soon, so would he. Daniel came home on a Thursday evening. I heard his car pull into the driveway, the familiar sound of the engine cutting off, the door slamming shut. Moments later, his key turned in the lock, and his voice echoed through the house, warm, tired, relieved to be home. "I'm back," he called out. Megan practically flew down the stairs, her face lit up with the kind of joy she only ever showed when he was around. "Babe," she squealed, throwing her arms around him. "I missed you so much." He laughed, kissing her forehead, holding her close. "Missed you too," he murmured. I stood in the doorway of the living room, watching them. Daniel's eyes met mine over Megan's shoulder, and his face softened. "Hey, Mom, how've you been?" "Fine," I said quietly, hugging him back. "I'm glad you're home." "Me too." Megan looped her arm through his, already pulling him toward the kitchen. "I made your favorite for dinner," she said brightly. "Come on, you must be starving." But I spoke up before they could disappear. "Daniel," I said, voice calm but firm. "Before dinner, could I talk to you for a moment?" He turned, a little surprised. "Sure, Mom. What's up?" Megan's smile tightened, just barely. Her eyes flicked to me, sharp, suspicious. "It'll just take a minute," I said. "In the living room?" "Nada." Daniel nodded, following me into the room. Megan hesitated, hovering in the doorway like she wanted to follow, but I gently closed the door. It was just the two of us now. Daniel sat down on the couch, looking at me with mild concern. "Is everything okay?" he asked. I took a slow breath, steadying myself. This was it. "I need to show you something," I said quietly. I picked up the tablet from the side table and sat down next to him. My hands were surprisingly steady as I opened the security app and pulled up the saved footage. "You remember the camera you installed in the kitchen?" He nodded. "Yeah. Why?" I didn't answer. I just pressed play. The screen flickered to life, showing the kitchen. Daniel leaned forward slightly, watching. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Just an empty kitchen, quiet and still. And then I appeared on screen, walking slowly, reaching for my glasses on the counter. Daniel watched, confused. And then I fell. I saw his body tense immediately. His hand went to his mouth. "Mom," he started, his voice thick with concern. But I held up a hand, stopping him. "Wait, just watch," I said softly. He turned back to the screen. And then Megan appeared. She stood in the doorway, watching me on the floor, struggling to get up. And then she laughed. The sound was muted, but the image was crystal clear. Her face alight with amusement, her hand pressed to her mouth as she giggled. Daniel went completely still. What is she?" he whispered. I rewound the footage. "There's more," I said quietly. He didn't say anything. He just stared at the screen, his jaw clenched, his eyes dark with something I hadn't seen in him before. Anger. When the footage ended, the silence in the room was deafening. Finally, Daniel spoke, his voice low and tight. "How long ago was this?" "A week," I said, "right after you left for your trip."
He exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. And you didn't tell me? I didn't know how, I admitted. I didn't think you'd believe me. I didn't have proof until I checked the camera. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of guilt and heartbreak. Mom, his voice cracked. I'm so sorry. I had no idea He couldn't finish the sentence. He stood up abruptly, the tablet still in his hand, and walked toward the door. Daniel, I said gently, what are you going to do? He didn't answer. He just opened the door and walked into the kitchen where Megan was setting the table, humming softly to herself. She looked up when he entered, her smile bright and welcoming. There you are. Dinner's almost ready. Why did you laugh? Daniel's voice was cold, flat. What? When my mother fell, he said, his voice dangerously quiet. Why did you laugh? The color drained from her face. I don't know what you're talking about, she stammered. Daniel held up the tablet. Yes, you do. He pressed play, and Megan watched, frozen, as her own cruelty played out on the screen. When it ended, the silence was suffocating. It wasn't, I didn't, she started, her voice shaking. It wasn't like that, Daniel. I was just surprised. I didn't mean you left the floor wet on purpose. No, I just forgot to. You checked the hallway. You knew she was coming. Megan's mouth opened and closed, no words coming out. She looked at me, standing in the doorway, and for the first time, I saw something in her eyes I'd never seen before. Fear. Daniel, please, she whispered, tears welling up. I love you. I love your mom. I would never. Don't, he said, his voice breaking. Don't lie to me anymore. She reached for him, but he stepped back. How long? He asked quietly. How long have you been treating her like this? Megan's face crumpled. I don't. How long, Megan? She didn't answer. And in that silence, the truth was louder than any words. Daniel looked at her, really looked at her. And I saw the moment his heart broke. He said, I want you to leave. Her eyes widened. What? He said, pack your things and leave. Daniel, no, please, she was sobbing now, reaching for him desperately. I'm sorry, I'll change, I swear I'll. You laughed when she fell, Daniel said, his voice cracking. You humiliated her, you hurt her, and you did it knowing I wasn't there to stop you. He shook his head, tears streaming down his face. I don't even know who you are anymore. Megan collapsed onto the floor, sobbing, begging, pleading. But Daniel didn't move. He just stood there, watching her, his face a mask of heartbreak and resolute. And I stood in the doorway, silent, my chest tight with a mixture of relief and sorrow.
This wasn't the justice I'd wanted. I hadn't wanted to see my son's heart break, but it was the truth. And sometimes, the truth is the most painful thing of all. Megan left 2 days later. She packed her things in silence, moving through the house like a ghost, her eyes red and swollen, her face hollow. Daniel didn't help her. He didn't speak to her. He just watched from the doorway, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. When she was done, she stood by the front door, her suitcases at her feet, and looked at him one last time. I'm sorry, she whispered. He didn't respond. She turned to me then, her eyes pleading, I'm sorry, Mom, she said, her voice breaking. I really am. I looked at her. This woman who had made my life a living hell, who had humiliated me, hurt me, tried to break me. And I felt nothing. No anger, no satisfaction, no pity. Just a quiet, steady calm. Goodbye, Megan, I said softly. She flinched as if the words had physically hurt her. And then she left. The door closed behind her and the house fell silent. Daniel stood there for a long moment, staring at the door, his shoulders trembling, and then he broke. He sank down onto the stairs, his head in his hands, and sobbed, deep, wrenching sobs that shook his entire body. I walked over slowly and sat down beside him, wrapping my arms around him the way I used to when he was a little boy.
Yes, I said, I really am. He sat down across from me, pouring himself a cup of tea. I've been thinking, he said quietly, about everything that happened, about how I didn't see it, how I let it go on for so long. Daniel? No, let me finish, he said gently. I know you've forgiven me, but I need to say this. I'm going to do better. I'm going to listen to you. Really listen, and I'm never going to let anyone treat you like that again. Tears pricked my eyes. Thank you, I whispered. He reached across the table and took my hand. You're the strongest person I know, and I'm so grateful you're still here. I squeezed his hand, my heart full. We sat there together in the quiet warmth of the kitchen, and for the first time in a long time, everything felt right. Later that night, as I lay in bed, I thought about everything that had happened. The pain, the betrayal, the fall, the laughter, but also the truth, the justice, the healing. I thought about Megan, wherever she was now, and I wondered if she'd learned anything from all of this, if she'd ever truly understand the hurt she caused. Maybe she would, maybe she wouldn't. But that wasn't my burden to carry anymore. I'd stood up for myself. I'd found my voice. I'd reclaimed my dignity, and that was enough. As I drifted off to sleep, a small smile touched my lips, because I knew something now that I hadn't known before. I was stronger than I ever given myself credit for, and no one would ever make me feel small again. Sometimes the cruelest wounds are the ones inflicted in silence, the ones that happen behind closed doors in quiet moments when no one is watching. But here's the thing about truth. It always finds a way to come to light. This story isn't just about a fall or a laugh or a camera. It's about dignity, about resilience, about refusing to let someone else's cruelty define who you are. It's about knowing your worth,
even when the people around you try to convince you otherwise. And it's about the quiet, patient strength that comes from waiting for the right moment to stand up for yourself. Because justice doesn't always come with thunderous confrontation. Sometimes it comes softly, in the form of truth, calmly revealed. And sometimes that's the most powerful kind of justice there is. If you've ever felt invisible, unheard, or pushed aside, remember this: your voice matters. Your pain is real, and you are stronger than you think. Don't let anyone take that away from you. Not ever.